She was once the most talked about woman on the planet. Her name was a punchline on every late-night show. Comedians built careers off her humiliation. Politicians used her as a weapon. And the internet, still in its infancy, tore her apart in ways the world had never seen before. But here's what nobody told you. While the world was busy laughing, Monica Lewinsky was quietly rebuilding. And what she built and what she chose not to build tells a story far more fascinating than any scandal ever could. Today, at 51 years old, her net worth sits at an estimated $1.5 million. You heard that right. Not $50 million. Not $20 million. $1.5 million. For a woman who was offered more than $10 million in deals alone, that number is either a tragedy or triumph, depending entirely on how you look at it. Stay with us, because by the end of the story, you might just decide it's the latter. To understand where Monica Lewinsky is today, you have to understand where she came from, and it wasn't the ordinary middle-class background the tabloids painted. Monica was born on July 23, 1973, in San Francisco, California, into a family that was anything but simple. Her father, Dr. Bernard Lewinsky, was a prominent oncologist whose family history reads like a novel. His Jewish ancestors had fled Nazi persecution in the 1920s, first finding refuge in El Salvador before eventually making their way to the United States when Bernard was just a teenager. On her mother's side, the roots stretched even further. A Lithuanian Jewish grandfather, a grandmother born in the British-controlled Chinese city of Tianjin to Russian Jewish parents. This was a family that knew survival, that knew reinvention, that knew, perhaps better than most, that circumstances can change overnight. Growing up in Beverly Hills, Monica's childhood was lavished by almost any standard. The family lived in a Spanish-style mansion. Her father's oncology practice generated serious income. Vacations were expensive. The cars were Cadillacs and Mercedes. Her personal expenses alone, tennis lessons, hair appointments, private tutoring, ran to nearly $1,000 a month, and that was in 1980s money. She attended elite private schools, rubbing shoulders with children of Hollywood producers and entertainment executives. Sweet 16 birthdays in her social circle meant luxury cars as gifts. It was, by every external measure, a charmed life. But appearances, as Monica would come to understand better than almost anyone in history, can be profoundly deceiving. When she was 14 years old, her parents' marriage collapsed in what can only be described as a spectacular and painful implosion. The divorce proceedings were bitter and accusatory. Therapy bills piled up. Her father's household became emotionally volatile. And Monica, still a teenager trying to make sense of the world, was absorbing all of it. The chaos, the dishonesty, the complexity of love twisted up with power and betrayal. She later admitted, in recordings that would eventually become public, that she felt she had grown up surrounded by lies, that she had learned to lie herself. These were not the confessions of a manipulator. They were the admissions of a young woman shaped, as so many are, by a home environment that never gave her a solid foundation. She transferred schools, eventually landing at Bel Air Prep, a small, expensive institution known for taking in troubled students from wealthy families. The class was tiny. Monica thrived there, throwing herself into choir, art, and drama. She graduated as valedictorian. Her classmates predicted she'd be famous one day. They were right. Nobody guessed how. After graduating from Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, in 1995, with a degree in psychology, Monica landed something extraordinary, an unpaid internship at the White House. She got the placement through a family connection, a Democratic donor who knew her mother. She had no political background, no Washington experience, just a degree, a connection, and a relentless energy that people either loved or found overwhelming. She was assigned to the Office of Chief of Staff Leon Panetta. She had been there barely a month when the federal government shut down in November 1995, sending most paid staff home. Unpaid interns, however, were asked to stay on, and that's when the trajectory of her entire life changed. President Bill Clinton, then 49 years old, began spending more time in the West Wing during the shutdown. Monica Lewinsky was 22. What began in those quiet, understaffed corridors would spiral into the most publicized political scandal of the 20th century. Over the following 18 months, the two had what the subsequent independent counsel investigation would document as 9 sexual encounters, most occurring in or near the Oval Office. There were gifts exchanged, late-night phone calls, an emotional intimacy that Monica, by her own account, mistook for something deeper and more meaningful than it apparently was. In April 1996, White House staff, increasingly uncomfortable with the amount of time Lewinsky was spending near the president, transferred her to the Pentagon. Even that didn't fully sever the connection. Phone calls continued. The emotional entanglement persisted. Then came Linda Tripp. At the Pentagon, Monica befriended Tripp, a woman more than 20 years her senior, who had also worked at the White House. Monica, isolated and emotionally raw, trusted her completely. She confided everything. The affair, her feelings, her confusion, her hope that Clinton might somehow leave his marriage for her. It was the kind of trust you extend to someone you've mistaken for a mother figure. Tripp was recording every word. Over the course of several months, she secretly taped more than 20 hours of their phone conversations. She then handed those tapes to independent counsel Kenneth Starr, whose team had been investigating Clinton since 1994. On January 16th, 1998, Tripp wore a wire during a final lunch with Monica at a hotel in Virginia. That conversation sealed the legal case. 2 days later, on January 18, 1998, the story broke publicly via the Drudge Report. And overnight, Monica Lewinsky's life as she had known it ceased to exist. The media coverage that followed was, by any modern standard of ethical journalism, catastrophic in its cruelty. Cameras surrounded her apartment building around the clock. Her clothing was analyzed. Her appearance was mocked. Her psychology was publicly dissected by people who had never met her. Late-night hosts built entire segments around her name. She was not treated as a human being. She was treated as a cultural prop. On January 26, 1998, President Clinton stood beside Hillary Clinton at a White House podium and said the words that would echo for decades. "I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." He never used her first name. She was simply that woman. For Monica, who had believed, however naively, that there was something meaningful between them, those 5 words were a particular kind of devastation. They weren't just a public denial. They were an erasure. Privately, according to accounts Monica has shared in the years since, the toll was severe. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. Her mother, terrified of losing her daughter to despair, barely left her side. Monica has spoken candidly about having had thoughts of suicide during this period, thoughts she never acted on, but that were real and that reflected the genuine psychological damage being inflicted by the relentless public humiliation. The Clinton White House, meanwhile, ran an active campaign to discredit her. She was painted as unstable, obsessive, delusional. The word stalker circulated. The narrative was designed not merely to protect the presidency, but to destroy a young woman's credibility so completely that nothing she said could ever be believed. Monica herself, years later, would call it exactly what it was: gaslighting on a national scale. On July 28, 1998, after months of negotiations, Monica agreed to testify before a grand jury in exchange for full transactional immunity. She was 25 years old. She told the truth. In August, Clinton testified under oath and delivered what became one of the most analyzed sentences in American political history. His now infamous parsing of the word is: on December 19, 1998, the House of Representatives voted to impeach President William Jefferson Clinton on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. When the case reached the Senate, however, neither article secured the 2/3 majority required for removal. Clinton remained in office. Monica Lewinsky did not remain whole. Here is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary, not because of how much money Monica Lewinsky made, but because of how much she deliberately chose not to make. In the immediate aftermath of the scandal, she was, in pure commercial terms, a gold mine. Her name was the most recognized in the world. Every major media outlet wanted her. Every brand that understood the dark arithmetic of notoriety came calling. The Barbara Walters interview in March 1999 drew 70 million viewers, one of the most watched television news events in American history. ABC's advertising rates quadrupled. That interview earned Monica approximately $1 million from international rights alone. It was her most visible and, for a time, most lucrative moment. Her memoir, Monica's Story, written with Andrew Morton, the same journalist who had told Princess Diana's story, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The deal was worth around $500,000. The book was raw and specific, going well beyond the Star Report's clinical language to describe the human experience behind the headlines. Then came Jenny Craig. In early 2000, the weight loss company signed her to a deal that was reportedly worth $1 million, built around a public weight loss journey. It was marketed with the kind of tone-deaf corporate optimism that repackaged Monica's personal insecurities as a brand opportunity. A $7.2 million advertising campaign was planned, and then, almost immediately, it began to unravel. Franchises refused to run the ads. Consumer backlash was swift and loud. By April 2000, the campaign was dead. Monica walked away with around $300,000, less than a third of what had been promised. She then launched a handbag line, The Real Monica Incorporated, which showed genuine creativity and business instincts. Her reversible tote bags were stocked in respected retailers, including Henri Bendel in New York and Fred Siegel in California. Fashion journalists began writing about her designs rather than her past. For a brief, hopeful window, it looked like she might actually carve out a legitimate commercial identity. It didn't last. The scandal's gravity was too strong. No matter what she built, she was pulled back into the same orbit. In 2003, she hosted a Fox reality dating show called Mr. Personality, in which male contestants wore face masks throughout the competition, a high-concept premise that briefly pulled strong ratings before collapsing under the weight of public ambivalence. 5 episodes. Canceled. Over the years between 2000 and roughly 2014, Monica Lewinsky turned down deals and offers totaling more than $10 million. This is not a rumor or an estimate whispered by unnamed insiders. Monica has stated this directly and publicly. $10 million. Declined. The reasons varied. Some offers felt exploitative. Some required her to degrade herself further. Some came attached to conditions that would have required her to remain permanently defined by the worst moment of her life. That choice, repeated, deliberate, and costly, is perhaps the most revealing thing about her character. In an era when celebrity scandal had become a reliable revenue stream, Monica Lewinsky kept saying no. She paid a steep price for her integrity. And yet somehow, it bought her something money couldn't. The true turning point came quietly, more than 15 years after the scandal. In June 2014, Monica published a 6,000-word essay in Vanity Fair titled Shame and Survival. The piece was personal, precise, and far more sophisticated than anything the public had previously heard from her. She wrote about cyberbullying, about public shaming as a social weapon, about being, in her own phrase, patient zero of internet humiliation. What prompted her to speak? The suicide of Tyler Clementi, an 18-year-old Rutgers University student who was secretly filmed by a roommate during an intimate encounter and subsequently took his own life. Monica's mother, reading about the story, wept. She remembered the nights in 1998 when she had been afraid to leave. Monica alone in the bathroom, when she'd kept the door open, when she'd stayed by her daughter's bed, terrified. Monica's Vanity Fair essay was not a comeback piece. It was a thesis statement. It announced that she intended to be useful, not just visible. In March 2015, she gave a TED Talk titled The Price of Shame. In 20 minutes, she laid out an argument about the economics of public humiliation, how clicks and outrage had become monetized, how the internet had built an infrastructure for cruelty that operated at industrial scale, and how ordinary people were being destroyed by it every day. She positioned herself not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as an expert witness who had survived something most people hadn't. The talk went viral. More than 20 million views. The response was characteristically mixed. Trolls filled her comments and social media with fresh waves of abuse. But something had shifted. The dominant cultural conversation about Monica Lewinsky began, slowly but perceptibly, to change. She became an anti-bullying activist, working with organizations focused on digital safety and the psychological damage of public shaming. She spoke at universities, corporations, and conferences. Her speaking engagements became a primary source of income and a genuine extension of her advocacy rather than simply a commercial transaction. Then came Hollywood. By 2021, Monica Lewinsky had established a production company called Alt Ending, which signed a first-look development deal with 20th Television, the studio behind prestige properties like The Simpsons and This Is Us. This was not a vanity arrangement. She served as executive producer on Impeachment, American Crime Story, Ryan Murphy's dramatization of the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, which aired on FX in September 2021 and starred Beanie Feldstein as Monica. The fact that Monica had creative input into the telling of her own story, that she was in a room, that her perspective shaped the narrative, was genuinely historic. She also co-produced an HBO Max documentary, 15 Minutes of Shame, exploring the broader cultural epidemic of public humiliation. The title carried obvious personal resonance. The project reflected exactly the kind of work she had been building toward, not about her specifically, but using her experience as a lens through which to examine something larger. As of 2025, Monica Lewinsky is 51 years old. Her estimated net worth is $1.5 million. Let's sit with that number for a moment. She earned approximately $1 million from the Barbara Walters interview, around $500,000 from her memoir, a reduced payout from Jenny Craig, revenue from speaking engagements, production deals, and advocacy partnerships. And she voluntarily declined more than $10 million in offers that didn't meet her standards. For a woman of her name recognition, her media presence, and her cultural footprint, $1.5 million is an almost paradoxically modest figure. And yet it tells you everything about the choices she made. In February 2025, she launched a podcast called Reclaiming. In the premiere episode, she spoke with unusual directness about the years in Washington, admitting she had believed genuinely that she mattered to President Clinton, that she had imagined a future, that the reality of how she'd been treated and then discarded had taken a very long time to fully absorb. The podcast features conversations with guests who have experienced their own versions of public humiliation, navigating the aftermath and the long work of rebuilding identity. She told Stephen Colbert on The Late Show that her dream podcast guest was Taylor Swift, someone she described as a person who understands what it means to have your story told by everyone except yourself. Monica Lewinsky holds a master's degree in social psychology from the London School of Economics, earned in 2006, a credential that quietly signals what she was doing during those years of public silence, studying, preparing, building intellectual frameworks for the work she intended to do. So, what do we do with all of this? Monica Lewinsky's net worth at 51 is $1.5 million. And depending on the lens you use, that's either a cautionary tale about the limits of notoriety as a financial asset, or the quiet, dignified testament to what happens when someone refuses to let the worst thing that ever happened to them become their only product. She was 22 years old when her life was turned inside out by forces far more powerful than she was. She was publicly humiliated at a scale the world had never quite seen before. She was lied about, laughed at, pitted, condemned, sexualized, and dismissed, often simultaneously, by a culture that had decided she was a symbol rather than a person. And she decided, at some point in the long years that followed, that she was not going to get rich by leaning into that. She was going to get useful. The $10 million she left on the table bought her something that doesn't show up in a net worth calculation: the credibility to stand in front of audiences around the world and talk about shame, survival, and the human cost of cruelty, and to be believed. She once said, "I eventually realized that I couldn't run away from what happened to me. I had to integrate it." That's not a comeback story. That's something harder and rarer. That's someone figuring out how to turn a thing that nearly destroyed them into the thing that defines them, on their own terms, at their own pace, with their own name. At 51, Monica Lewinsky is worth $1.5 million. She is also, by any meaningful measure, one of the most consequential public voices on digital culture, shame, and the ethics of public life in the 21st century. You tell us which number matters more. If you found the story worth your time, consider sharing it. And if you've been following Monica Lewinsky's journey, we'd genuinely like to know, do you think history has been fair to her? Drop your thoughts below.